erudite, articulate, and widely traveled ambassadors of Ayurveda today. She acquired her PhD in NMR physics from Cambridge University, UK in 1990 and has been on the faculty of All India Institute of Medical Sciences, AIIMS, Delhi since 1993. Between 2002 and 2008, she took 5.5 years leave from AIIMS to pursue BAMS, that is Bachelor of Ayurvedic Medicine and Surgery degree from Chennai. And I must mention that this was by choice because she was also offered admission in MBBS. Her area of specialization is biomedical NMR, radio frequency, coil designing and building, RF pulse sequence programming, clinical imaging and spectroscopy, neuroscience application of MR. She has wide experience in both experimental and clinical MRI and spectroscopy. She developed indigenously a low-cost RF transmitter receiver coil for clinical use, for which she received the Young Scientist Award. During her stint as a visiting professor at the Max Planck Institute of Biophysical Chemistry, Göttingen, Germany, she worked on functional MRS techniques. She has a number of research publications, awards, and honors to her credit. Using her vantage position as a physicist and an Ayurvedic physician, she is currently involved in scientific research in Ayurveda, its concepts, methods, pharmacology, and clinical practices using NMR, MRI, and a number of analytical techniques. She is also actively engaged in dissemination of knowledge of the science behind Ayurveda. To add something more to his credits, to her credits, she is musician trained in Carnatic vocal, veena, and violin, and she is also a great artist. So now I welcome Professor Rama Jasundar for his lecture. Thank you, ma'am.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for that very kind introduction, Vivek. It's my pleasure and honor to be, invited to share my knowledge on Ayurveda. And let me take this opportunity to congratulate AICTE for having taken this very important initiative of exposing our own people to our own Indian knowledge systems. So today I am going to talk on Ayurveda, which is a very unique Indian knowledge system because it straddles many disciplines. So Ayurveda is in fact a melting pot of many disciplines. So there is botany, that's Vriksha Ayurveda, veterinary science, Mriga Ayurveda, yoga, meditation, chanting mantra, astronomy, philosophy, metallurgy. So you had a brilliant and highly respected, esteemed speaker just before me speaking on metallurgy in India. Civil engineering and architecture, agriculture, ethics, mathematics, chemistry, physics, pharmacology, culinary science, diet and nutrition, water management, environment, and ecology. So here I have tried to put all these disciplines into one slide here, just to drive home the point that Ayurveda drew upon many disciplines in its efforts to handle health and disease of the population. That was the kind of importance Ayurveda gave to the health of its population. So wherever it could get help from, whichever discipline was able to contribute to it, either in terms of the concepts or technology or in any way, Ayurveda was ready to touch base with these disciplines. The other important point is it also gives you an idea about the other disciplines that were there during the time of Ayurveda. Now, you may say that all these are disciplines that, modern science, as modern scientists and technologists and engineers, we are all working on various aspects of these disciplines. And you may say that, so what? I think what we all should not forget is that some of the disciplines that I have shown here have just been taken cognizance of in modern science. So for example, diet and nutrition. Only recently have we realized the importance of diet and nutrition and ecological health, environmental health. It's now dawning upon us as to how the health of the ecology, ecosystems, and the environment affect the health of the population. But these are topics and that Ayurveda had already thought about, and then they have already translated these into a practical terms to handle the health of the society. Now, let me give you all some basic information about Ayurveda and how it handles health and disease, and why and where it differs from modern medicine with which we are all very, very familiar with. And then you all will be in your position to think for yourself whether it's a discipline if it has any relevance in the contemporary time. So let me start with the evolution of Ayurveda. The storyline of Ayurveda's terrestrial history begins with sage Bharadwaja. So I'm not going into the nuanced details of these great people who had set very, very important milestones, not only for Ayurveda, but in medicine. And what they have done is relevant to the world of medicine, whether it is from the East or the West. So as I said, the storyline of Ayurveda's terrestrial history begins with sage Bharadwaja. And what did he do? So during his time, a conference on Ayurveda took place at the foothills of Himalayas, and of course, so thousands of years ago. And so this is lost in the midst of antiquity. And what happened in that conference? Let me hasten to tell you all that these are all documented. So this documentation is still available, and all the information I have taken are from documented literature. Wherever possible, I have given the reference as well. So what happened in this conference? It was a conference of learned sages, not only from India, but from neighboring lands as well. So there were learned people, Ayurvedic acharyas, who had come from Persia and even Greece and even China. So this was a conference of highly intelligent and Vaidyas and who were with lot of experience. And what was the aim? Surprisingly, to find a solution for the increasing ill health. I mean, after all these years, we still are having the same kind of discussion on the same topic, right? So there is increasing ill health, and how do we handle it? So this seems to have been the case even more than 5,000 years ago. Bharadwaja then explained to these congregation the science of life and the three principles, etiology, symptomatology, and therapeutics as a means to well-being. Now, I want to point out a couple of things in this third point here. You note the word science. It is science of life, and the three principles, three guiding principles for medicine, even now, the Western medicine or the allopathic medicine, as we call it, is etiology. Etiology means the causative factors, what are the reasons for a disease to have taken place, that is etiology. Symptomatology, what are the signs and symptoms, because ultimately these form the basis for diagnosis and treatment. And the therapeutics, so how to treat the disease. So these three are still the three major pillars for any medicine, whether it is from west or east or north or south. And thousands of years ago, Bharadwaja explained to the congregation that these three will form the basic pillars to study and handle well-being. Now, just because it was Sage Bharadwaja, he was a seer, actually, a rishi, and a very, very learned person, highly respectable person. Just because he was in that exalted position, others did not agree to him, right? So just because Bharadwaja said something, nobody said, okay, sir, right? But they deliberated on what Bharadwaja said, they debated on it, and only then accepted these as the basic components of a health or a medical system. Now, this last point is important for us, especially the Indians, because we somehow have these wrong notions about ourselves, that we were a culture who were trained not to ask questions, that we were, we had to take what the elders say. It is not so. If one actually reads the literature available, it is full of deliberations and debates and arguments, and only then whatever needs to be understood and accepted is understood. So this had happened in the context of Ayurveda as well. So Bharadwaja, the first promulgator of Ayurveda on earth, should also be called as father of medicine. He created 8 medical specialities. So these are, so I have shown the 8 specialities here. Kaya Chikitsa, which is internal medicine, Bala Chikitsa, which is pediatrics. So under pediatrics, also obstetrics and gynecology, the mother and child, it comes together under pediatrics. Visha Chikitsa, which is toxicology. Bhuta Vidya, which is diseases due to unforeseen causes. Rasayana, the rejuvenation and anti-aging, there was a separate discipline for that. The reproductive and sexual health, surgery, Shalya and Shalakya, diseases of supraclavicular region, which means that diseases occurring in the region above, in organs above the shoulder. So ear, nose and throat, ophthalmology and brain, all these organs, the diseases pertaining to this come under Shalakya. Now, what is interesting is, right from the word go, there were 8 disciplines. Now, if you look at modern medicine, the major disciplines when they started was internal medicine and surgery. And all the other disciplines and specialities came much later. So for example, if you take pediatrics, so at some point in time, in the early stages, children were considered as small adults. And, if you look at geriatrics, which can in a way be correlated with this anti-aging. So this is just a few decades old. So, there are a lot of thoughts seem to have gone into how the disciplines, the Ayurveda as a discipline should develop. And what this picture shows you all is that there were also specialists for each of these disciplines. And so there were specialists for these disciplines, and there were many, many, many books which were written by these specialists, and which we all can feel very happy that we have lost most of them, and we are even oblivious of what we had and what we have lost and what we still have, so that comprehension, that cognizance is not there, very sadly, in our the educated Indian community. So getting back to the topic, so Bharadwaja had many students, and one very famous student who was also a very great Ayurvedic Acharya and Ayurvedic Vaidya was Atreya. Now, what is very interesting about Atreya, which I want to communicate to you all, is his emphasis on rationalism in medicine. Now, we all think that only the modern science, the Western science, has taught us to be scientific and have a rational approach. It isn't so. So the proof is how Ayurveda, how Atreya had kept emphasizing on rationalism and scientificity from the word go, and repeatedly. And all these information are still there if anybody wants to check on these. So Atreya had a very strong rational spirit, and the maladies believed to be of demonic origin were put down very strongly by Atreya. Atreya said that these diseases are due to purely physical and physiological causes and volitional transgression, which means that you know you should not do this, but you still go ahead and do it. So for example, we all know that we need to wear the mask during this pandemic time, and there has to be a social etiquette and a cough etiquette and a cold etiquette and whatnot. But we know that we need to do these, follow these to protect ourselves and to protect our fellow Indians as well. But we do not do it. So that is volitional transgression. You know what you should do, but you still go ahead and violate it. That is volitional transgression. And so Atreya goes on to say how all the diseases have to be treated in a scientific and rational manner. And what is very interesting is what Atreya talks about insanity. Insanity, he says, is neither gods nor demons have anything to do with it. Insanity, Atreya says, results from wrongful behavior and thinking and must be countered by suitable remedies. Atreya says all sufferings in body and mind are due to ignorance of what to do and what not to do, and all happiness and good health has its foundation in pure scientific knowledge. Atreya thus was a great rationalist, but he was also a very great teacher and Vaidya. He was the first Ayurvedic Vaidya to correlate drug to a disease. So he said for this disease, these drugs have to be used. So there are many recipes which Atreya had come up with, which are about which we still have the information and which are still being till date being used by Ayurvedic Vaidyas. But he was also a great teacher. So he repeatedly emphasized the importance of scientific and logical thinking. Not only that, he brought in the importance of scientific discussions, debates, and conferences. So there is always an assumption that there is a lot of secrecy in Ayurveda, that the knowledge is not open to people, others, and people keep the knowledge to themselves. I think this is a very wrong assumption, and because thousands of years ago, there were lots of discussions, and these great Vaidyas had emphasized the importance of these as well. And Atreya laid down elaborate rules and regulations for conducting meetings, for choosing topics for lectures, how to review scientific works, and he laid down elaborate rules and regulations for teaching methods. We are now talking of pedagogy, and Atreya had set these up thousands of years ago, and he also told how to write books for experts, how to write subject books for lay people, and how to arrange and classify medical concepts for books, and how to spotlight salient points of a subject. So, for example, we say summary, right? Or an abstract. So what does a summary and abstract does? So they actually spotlight the important points of a subject. So Atreya tells how to spotlight salient points of a subject when they either give a talk, or when they conclude a talk, or when they write a book. And everywhere, this entire writing is peppered with the importance of reason and logic. And he also tells how reason and logic are compromised in a hostile debate. So the debate should never be hostile, because everybody loses the reasoning ability. And what is very interesting is how to identify a true physician from a quack. So even in those days, there were people who cheated were always there, right? So it's not now and alone. So there were quacks, and even in those days, and Atreya has laid down rules, as to how to identify who a quack is. So rational and scientific medicine was ushered in by Atreya. And so from Bharadwaja to many other students Bharadwaja had, And one major student, one very important student is Atreya. As I said, from Atreya, it went on to Agnivesha. Atreya again had many students. Agnivesha was one very important student under Atreya. And from Agnivesha, it went on to many other students, and then it went to Charaka, and then to Dridabala. So the dotted arrows here indicate that there were a lot of other generations of students between Agnivesha and Dridabala. So at least 1,000 years had passed between Atreya and Dridabala. And but the underlying rational and scientific that you see, one would see in an Ayurvedic textbook to this day, is something that Atreya had laid the foundation of. So the foundation, scientific and rational foundation laid by Atreya was carried forward by generations of Ayurvedic students, and it has reached the 2020 as well in more or less the same form. So that is, I mean, I can go on and on about, the other acharyas who had set very important milestones, and the numerous books, hundreds and hundreds of Ayurvedic textbooks, which were written by all these great people. But that's not the focus of my talk today. So I will have to get down to business quickly. So I would like to talk about how Ayurveda, as a very pragmatic, practical medicine, how it handles health and disease. Now, for this, let us take a few steps back and refresh our memories about some basic information that would be required to understand how a system of medicine has developed as a clinical medicine. So all medical systems are founded on basic sciences. It could be allopathy, it could be Ayurveda, it could be homeopathy, it could be Siddha, it could be Unani. All of the medical systems are applied sciences. Just like engineering and technology, they are applied sciences, and they have been founded they have fundamental sciences which have helped them develop. Similarly, medical systems are also applied sciences founded on basic sciences. And what does the basic science do? So the basic sciences provide concepts, theories, and methodologies to understand the biological system, to elucidate the physiology, to explain and interpret diseases, and provide techniques for diagnosis and treatment. But even more important is the understanding of reality, or in other words, the world view provided by the fundamental science shapes everything that the applied sciences do. So what is a worldview? A worldview is a set of beliefs about fundamental aspects of reality, fundamental aspects of nature, fundamental aspects of what is around us, fundamental aspects of what we see with our naked eye. So these beliefs, they ground and influence one's perception, thinking, knowing, and doing. Not only it affects an individual, but it affects the sciences they come up with. So for example, let me tell you how important, what an important role, what a crucial fundamental role that the worldview has played in clinical medicine. So when you talk of clinical medicine, all clinical medicine begins with diagnosis and ends with treatment. That is all there is to any clinical medicine. Diagnosis, there is a patient with some problem, and you diagnose the disease, and then you give the treatment. So it begins and ends with diagnosis and treatment. The treatment is defined by how the diagnosis is done, but something else defines how a diagnosis is done. So if the diagnosis is based on structures, is based on organs, it's based on molecules, it's based on proteins, it's based on genes, then why is it? Why is it that these specific parameters are used to diagnose a disease? It is because the diagnosis is defined by how the human system is understood. The way the human system is conceptualized if the human system is conceptualized in terms of molecules and proteins and genes and organs, then this is going to reflect in the way diagnosis is done. And the way the diagnosis is done, it will reflect in the way that the treatment is delivered. Now, so far, I think it is pretty obvious, but what probably has skipped people's mind is something else defines how the human system is understood. Because the human system is a very complex system, right? So there must be more than one way of looking at the human system. So why is it that a particular system of science has looked at it in a particular way, right? So the reason is here, understanding of reality. I told you all that there are fundamental sciences which contribute to the way the human system is, contribute the worldview, right? And so that actually defines how the human system is understood in the context of clinical medicine. So when we talk of different medical systems and say that, for example, if you take allopathy and Ayurveda, the first thing that will strike anybody is the way they handle health and disease is very different. The parameters are different. Forget about the language. One is in English, the other is in Sanskrit. We can translate to some extent, right? So the Sanskrit words, many of us do not know Sanskrit. And, if you want to read about any of our ancient systems, we take the help of English, the translation. So language is not the major issue, right? So why is it that Ayurveda handles the same system? Ultimately, the human system is the same. The heart is going to function in the same way. The stomach will function in the same way. Whether it is the patient goes to an allopathic doctor or an Ayurvedic doctor, the system is going to function in the same way. The physiology is not going to change. The structures are not going to change, right? But why is it that the handling of the complex system is different? So the difference actually arises here. So it is very important to understand how this aspect has influenced the treatment and diagnosis and this, right? Because it is very important, because right now, the whole world is talking of integration. If the whole world talks, of course, Indians, we follow suit. We have to talk. There is no need for us to think whether it is needed or not, but we think. If the West says yes, it is yes for us, unfortunately. So there is a talk of integrative health and integrating medical systems. But before we do that, we need to have clarity, absolute clarity of thought on whether it is the right thing and what will it end up with. See, ultimately, the intentions are right. Ultimately, we want the society to benefit from the different medical systems. It is also very, very true that no single system has answers for everything. But when we bring together more than 2 or 3 or 4 systems, we need to have clarity of thought as to why a particular system is speaking in a particular way. So the understanding actually starts from here, right? So let us start with allopathic system of medicine, because it is something that we are very, very comfortable with. We have unshakable faith in allopathic medicine, and we all know, we all contribute to it in some way, either, I as a scientist, I have been working in biomedical MR, and many of you, would be involved in it. For example, a computer scientist may be doing some IT solutions for this, and there may be some of you who are developing technologies for improving the diagnosis or whatever. So it is a system we are all trained in. It is a system which is a wonderful system. There is no doubt about it. It is a system which is supported heavily by science and technology and research and development. So let us use allopathy as the GPS to understand why Ayurveda is speaking in the terminologies that it is speaking in. So if you look at the fundamental sciences which have contributed to allopathy, physics plays a very, very major role. So here you can see some of the disciplines of physics, from mechanics, fluid dynamics, thermodynamics, electricity and magnetism, sound and light, quantum mechanics, nuclear radiation. And you also see that each of these disciplines have contributed their concepts to the development of modern medicine. So for example, if you take mechanics, the concept of energy and power has been used by allopathic system to understand, or the biology, modern biology, to understand how the muscles function. And the technological contribution of mechanics is prosthetics, the heart-lung machines, the artificial knee, pacemakers, all the mechanical devices or technological contributions from mechanics. So the same way, all these other disciplines in physics have contributed in terms of concepts, in terms of the technology as well. But the very major contribution of physics is its perspective on reality and worldview. The more you come to know about this, the more you read about it, you will understand how this has influenced all the disciplines in Western science. So that way, the fundamental perspective on reality, the fundamental understanding of nature in physics has played a very major role in shaping all the Western disciplines, from economics to sociology to physics, chemistry, and medicine and biology as well. So we know that physics has two major branches. One is the classical or Newton physics, the other is the quantum physics. And both these branches have very, very different worldview. In fact, they have diametrically opposite worldview. But the worldview that has been adopted by all the Western disciplines till date is the Newtonian worldview. So what is this Newtonian worldview? How does it look at the world? It looks at the universe, it looks at the world as being made of building blocks. I will elaborate on this a bit more a couple of slides later. And it understands the nature as being made of building blocks. And so when we go back to this slide, let us start from here. So now we are trying to understand why allopathy is handling the human system, handling health and disease the way it handles. So as I said, the root cause of these starts from here. So the classical worldview, the word classical is from the classical physics or Newtonian physics or deterministic physics, they all refer to the same. So what does the classical worldview say? It says that reality is made of material objects. It says that larger objects can be reduced to smaller ones. It says that objects behave in a deterministic manner, and which means that if you know the physical properties of an object, you can predict its behavior, and physical laws govern the objects. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of this, but I would like you all to draw your attention to the second point. Larger objects can be reduced to smaller ones. Let us see how it has impacted the way biology is understanding organisms. So here, the larger object is the human system, right? Now, it can be reduced to the smaller one. So this is the model of the human system with which we are all very familiar. We study in school, right? So atom is the fundamental building block, fundamental entity of everything physical in the world. And we are also physical beings, right? So we also fall into, when I say we, the human beings also fall into the class of physical beings according to Western science. And it's true as well. We have a physical form. So atoms form the fundamental entity, building block. Atoms make molecules, molecules make organelles, organelles make cells, cells make tissues, then you have organs, organ system, and then the entire organism. Right? So the entire organism, that is the human system, is reduced to the level of molecule, of course, to the level of atom, but for practical purposes, It is be considered, no, no allopathic doctor, when he or she treats the patient, nobody talks in terms of atoms, they talk in terms of molecules. So in fact, modern medicine is also called molecular medicine because they understand diseases as derangement at the level of molecules. Many a time diagnosis is made at this level and treatment is also delivered at this level. So this is a reductionistic approach where complex system is reduced to its fundamental entities, it is reduced to its component parts, and the focus is on structure. So this is called structural reductionism, where a complex system is considered as sum of its parts. This has led to a predominantly mechanistic viewpoint for modern medicine, where the human system is considered as a machine. Of course, these concepts are changing in a big way, but this is anyway underlying whatever changes that occurs. The fact is that the underlying viewpoint of modern medicine is structure oriented and it is mechanistic. It has a mechanistic viewpoint. It's a predominantly mechanistic viewpoint. So the structural viewpoint is reflected in everything that modern medicine does, be it diagnosis, be it treatment, be it diet and nutrition. So just a couple of quick examples. So if you look at diagnosis, all the radiological imaging, CT, X-ray, MRI, nuclear scan, PET scan, Doppler scans, ultrasound, all these radiological techniques looks for structural abnormalities. And even the biochemical diagnosis, it looks for structural entities, but at a subtler level. So for example, if you take anemia, the structural entity it would look for is the hemoglobin, whether there is a reduction in hemoglobin or the iron in it. So these are all structural entities, though at a subtler level. Even the microbiological diagnosis looks for structural entities like virus and bacteria and other pathogens. So you see how, of course, there are functional diagnoses like ECG, EMG, EEG. They are look for functional aspects of the human system, but there is no denying the fact that the bulk of the diagnosis is based on structures. The treatment has to be in tune with the diagnosis. So surgery, mechanical interventions play a very, very important role. So it's rectifying the structures, replacing the structures, supplementing the deficiencies, and even the drugs that we take, it works on chemical or structural manipulation. And maybe some of you here could be biotechnologists, so you know that what genetic engineering does, it's a kind of structural manipulation that is done. So you see how the methodological reductionism pervades and predominates modern medicine. And I would like to emphasize the point that this methodological reductionism has its origin from the worldview of put forward by the classical physics. Of course, there are definite advantages of reductionism. It leads to better understanding of the components and processes involved at the cellular level. Identification of malfunctioning components it's made very easy, and once you identify the malfunctioning components, one can aim for targeted therapies. So there are very definite advantages of reductionism. So with this basic information about allopathic system of medicine, why it looks at the human system the way it looks at, let me change gear and go on to speak of Ayurveda. Which is the science of life. So allopathy is a science of disease. So the predominant focus of allopathy has always been disease, and it's only recently they have begun to talk about prevention and the health and diet and nutrition. Otherwise, the predominant focus of allopathic medicine has been on disease. Ayurveda, from the word go, has been science of life. And when you say life, ill health is part and parcel of life. And you all, before I go on to talk about something more about Ayurveda, I just would like to remind you all about Ayush systems that we talk about now. So you all would have definitely heard of the Ministry of Ayush, and how it caters to the medical systems other than allopathy, and which are being practiced in India for centuries. So Ayush is an acronym standing for Ayurveda, Yoga, Naturopathy, Unani, Siddha, and Homeopathy. Now, of these, it's only Ayurveda and Siddha which can be linked to Indian knowledge systems. So Ayurveda and Siddha are Indian systems of medicine with a very, very fundamental base, in Indian knowledge systems. Now, you may be wondering why I have not included yoga. Now, yoga has never been a system of medicine. It is Ayurveda and Siddha which are systems of medicine. They talk about diagnosis and treatment. Yoga has never talked about diagnosis and treatment. The purpose of yoga has been very, very different. Ayurveda, of course, has drawn on yoga when required for treatment. But the purpose of yoga is something much more subtler, something much more, higher. And that's what the purpose of yoga is. And of course, we have now brought it down to a kind of treatment. And you may see that I have blocked out naturopathy because there is no basis for naturopathy in Indian knowledge system. And so it has got nothing to do with Indian knowledge system. So let me talk about Ayurveda because it's something that I know something about. Ayurveda is indigenous to not only India, but to the entire Indian subcontinent. It has uninterrupted medical practices going back to nearly 5,000 years. And that's a very conservative estimate. It would be even older than that. It's one of the most systematically documented system of medicine in the world. And it is a theory-based practice. This actually surprises many people. And they say they do not want to believe it. And I said, it's your take. Ayurveda is not a loser. If you say, I do not believe this aspect of Ayurveda, I said, you are the loser. That's what I usually tell. That's how I respond. The fact is that we are talking about a system of medicine which is more than 5,000 years. Now, what this number means is 5,000 years of observation of how a human system functions, documenting it. We are now talking of big data and data analytics. Now, you can imagine the amount of data that would have been accumulated and documented over 5,000 years. As I said, almost all the Ayurvedic acharyas of yesteryears, they were very keen observers and they documented every damn thing that they came across in their clinical practice. So there were thousands of books which have been written. Just because we do not know about these, it's not scientific to pass comments, be judgmental on a system about which we do not have any basic information, about which we do not know. So it is a theory-based system, a practice. And let me also add on this information that allopathy is not a theory-based system. Allopathy is an empirical system. It does not have a theory of health and disease, which is why every new disease is something that it has to research upon. So if it is chikungunya, then it has to research and then find out how to handle it. If it is, coronavirus, it's again a new disease for them. And then they have to do research and find out. If it is an autoimmune disease, it's a new disease. So every disease is a new disease which needs to be researched into. Now, that way Ayurveda is very different because it has a very strong theory which helps it to diagnose new diseases. So you do not require priori information about diseases to diagnose and treat a disease. And this holds good for coronavirus as well. So Ayurveda is made of two words, which is science of life. Put together, it means science of life. And because it talks about science of life, it talks about health. And when it talks about health, it talks about preventive and promotive health. When it talks about disease, it talks about the curative, how to treat the diseases. There is again an assumption that Ayurveda is only good at prevention and promotive. That is the strength of Ayurveda. It is true, it is very true, very much true that preventive and promotive health is one of the very, very strong point of Ayurveda. But the treatment the treatment in Ayurveda is also equally its strength. In fact, I would say that the treatment, I would give more importance to the treatment strategies in Ayurveda than the preventive and promotive thing, because preventive and promotive, although the information can be told to people, it requires self-discipline, right? But once the disease comes, how do you handle it? Ayurveda is very, very strong in treatment aspects as well. So let us go back to this slide. So where I have told you all that medical systems are founded on basic sciences. So if Atreya 5,000 years ago said that emphasized on science, scientificity and rationalism, then we need to, it has to follow the same path that allopathic medicine has followed. We have seen how fundamental sciences like physics has contributed to the development of allopathic medicine. So let us say if we have a similar story line for Ayurveda as well. So this is, we have already seen how physics has played a role, not only in contribution of its concepts and providing technology, but also in terms of the worldview. So do we have something similar for Ayurveda? Let us start about with the worldview. Yes, Ayurveda also has drawn fundamental information from fundamental sciences. These are called darshanas. And what does a darshana mean? A darshana means literally to see, to view, to have an insight. Interestingly, theory, which is drawn from the Greek word theoria, it also means exactly the same. Theory means to see, to view, to have an insight. So what does the darshana offer? The darshana offers theories and concepts on physical and non-physical realities and creation, how universe, life and matter have been created, what constitutes a physical matter, the relationship between mind, body and consciousness, Tridoshas, that is Vata, Pitta and Kapha. I am sure all of you would have heard of these three terms, although you all may not know what exactly it refers to. Vata, Pitta and Kapha, it runs as an undercurrent to the entire understanding of health and disease in Ayurveda. Pancha Mahabhutas, the fundamental elements, physical elements that constitute matter, transformation of substances to form new products, concepts of measurements, time, weight and length. So in my very initial slide, I said that mathematics has played a very, very important role in Ayurveda as well. There are many concepts that Ayurveda has drawn and used from mathematics. And darshanas also offer methodologies for scientific study and analysis. So these are the 6 darshanas that Ayurveda has drawn extensively from: Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaiseshika, Mimamsa, Yoga and Uttara Mimamsa. Mimamsa is called Purva Mimamsa. Uttara Mimamsa is also referred to as Vedanta. These 6 darshanas are generally known as the 6 Indian philosophies or Shad darshanas. And just like physics, the objective of physics was not to develop modern medicine. The objective of physics was something else. It was to study nature and understand. Similarly, but modern medicine has taken whatever it required from physics to develop itself. In the same way, the objectives of darshana is not to develop Ayurveda. Ayurveda has taken whatever it requires to develop itself from the darshanas. So I will not have time to go into the nuanced details of this. But I cannot control myself from at least saying a few words about this, because these are very interesting for me as a scientist, and I am sure for you all also as scientists and technologists and engineers, it would be very interesting to know how the system of Ayurveda has developed in a very, very scientific way. What were the methods they used, right? And so, for example, if you take Sankhya, so here you see that there are some letters that I have shown in white. The other ones are in a slightly mustard different color. The ones shown in white are the concepts of the darshana, and the ones shown in color are what Ayurveda has taken from the darshanas. So if you look at Sankhya Darshana, origin of universe and life and evolution of matter are some of the things that Sankhya philosophy talks about, and Ayurveda has used that to understand the relationship between mind, body and consciousness, the relationship between these three entities, the causality, and the Tridoshas, the Vata, Pitta, Kapha, and the Sapta Dhatu. Dhatus are tissue elements. There are 7 tissue elements Ayurveda talks about. These are all concepts that Ayurveda has drawn from Sankhya. If you look at Nyaya, it is a very, very interesting darshana. I mean, I would say which darshana is not interesting. As a scientist, if we have open mind and if you look at it, it's extremely very, very interesting to know how the same things that we are viewing in a particular way, how the same things have been viewed in a very, very different way. So this actually will open up our mind. We talk about out of the box thinking, we talk about lateral thinking, and the introduction to such systems will actually open up our minds. You forget about the fact that, these are Indian philosophies. You forget the word Indian there. You forget the fact that we are Indians. That is where the problem is. For us, we Indians, we feel that we should look down on our own system, right? So let us be very objective. Let us forget the fact that we are Indians. That is only coincidence, right? That we are born here. And let us also forget the fact that we are talking about Indian philosophies. So as educated people, we are looking at different philosophies which are having a different viewpoint. So let us look at Nyaya Darshana. It talks about deductive reasoning. It talks about logical inference, and it offers 16 methods of scientific inquiry, which if these 16 methods, if the terms are translated to English, it would read something like, literature survey, methods, study plan, method of acquisition, data analysis, data interpretation, discussion, conclusion. That's what these 16 methods talk about or about. And Ayurveda has used all these to develop various aspects of itself, and it uses it for diagnosis, for nomenclature, or for known and unknown diseases and herbs. And so whatever I have mentioned is just scratching the surface of how Ayurveda has drawn, what Ayurveda has drawn from these darshanas. If you look at Vaiseshika Darshana, it talks about concept of Anu. Concept Anu is very roughly translated as atom. It's not exactly atom as we understand in physics today, but I think the concept that the physical matter can be broken down to a very, very minute particle, and beyond which you cannot divide. I think that concept is what we need to appreciate. And classification on property of matter, formation of new substances, heat and transformation. These are some of the concepts Vaiseshika Darshana talks about. And Ayurveda uses these in a number of ways, from understanding of the physical body to herbs, drugs, drug combinations, processing of foods and herbs, and so on. Now, Purva Mimamsa is yet another very interesting darshana. I'm sorry to be repeating it for every darshana that I am talking about. It is because each darshana is a beauty by itself for scientists. Mimamsa talks about provides the logical decision support system for validating and interpreting texts. So for example, if there are 2 Ayurvedic texts, right? And one Ayurvedic text says that there are 3 doshas, and another and gives its own rational justification for it. Another Ayurvedic text says that there are 5 doshas, and they have their own reasoning for it, right? Now, which is true, right? How do you know without being biased? How do you look at things in an objective way to arrive at the truth? You need to have a methodology for this logical decision making, right? And this support system is given by Mimamsa Darshana. Yoga, I think I don't have to say anything about yoga, and it talks about union with ultimate reality. So Ayurveda talks about, understands how body, mind, and consciousness are connected with each other, and how all of these are connected or can be connected with the ultimate reality. Uttara Mimamsa, talks about interconnectedness and consciousness and many other things. But the basic way in which Ayurveda has conceptualized the human system springs from this aspect of interconnectedness. So Ayurveda looks at humans as an indivisible whole, and that is taken very, very heavily from Uttara Mimamsa. So as I said, you need to understand any system of medicine, even allopathic system of medicine, you need to start here. And to understand Ayurveda, let us start here, understanding of reality. So the worldview of Ayurveda is the Vedic worldview, which talks about interconnectedness. So it says that nature exists as a continuum, and where the universe is a dynamic web of interconnected and inseparable entities in a dynamic relationship. And you see how it is reflected in, and this is in contrast to this building block model of worldview adopted by modern medicine and provided by classical physics. So you see how the human system is understood in Ayurveda, or the human system has been conceptualized in Ayurveda as a seamless interconnected whole. So Ayurveda talks about 4 domains in a human system. There is a structural domain, physiological domain, a domain of mind, psychological domain, and a domain of consciousness. Now, each of these domains, they are interconnected. The whole human system is like an interconnected network, and there are modules for each of these domains, network independent modules. So for example, if you look at the structure, this domain is networked using channels, which are called srotas in Ayurveda. I'm not going to go into the details of this at all. There's no time. The physiological domain is networked through these parameters called Vata, Pitta, Kapha. I will scratch I will, touch upon this, on this aspect, basically scratch the surface of this big iceberg here. Each of these are big, big icebergs, and, we can only scratch it. Some of them I can't even scratch it. I simply will have to show it to you all. The psychological domain is networked through psychological parameters. The very subtle domain of consciousness is networked through levels of awareness, which are called panchakoshas. These are handled in a much elaborate way in yoga. But what is important is these areas of overlap. So these domains are not only intraconnected, but they are also interconnected. So there are parameters which connect these domains. And what is very interesting is how the subtlest domain of consciousness. So this is a non-physical entity. A structural domain is a very, very physical entity. How this physical entity and a non-physical entity, how are they interconnected? They are interconnected through the first level of awareness, which is the physical body. So a dead person does not have this first level of awareness, that he or she is not aware of the physical body because life has gone out of them. So the first level of awareness deals with the physicality of our existence, and that itself straight connects to the subtlest domain of consciousness. So so this is again, in great contrast to the structural hierarchical model that modern medicine has adopted. you see how it's the same system. You see the big difference in the way it has been conceptualized. So according to Ayurveda, we are seamlessly mind, body, and soul. And the interconnectedness extends beyond ourselves. So it's not only that, our entire system is connected with each other, but we are also connected to the environment. We are also connected to the ecosystem. We are connected to the ultimate, the reality as well. Yes, nature exists as a continuum, and Ayurveda talks about the unbroken continuity from the lowest inorganic to the highest organic forms. And Ayurveda very elegantly says in Charaka Samhita that from the core of our being to the vast expanse of the universe, we exist as one. It says that the whole universe is the expansion of one's consciousness. I think it's so elegantly put. I don't think it could have been put in a more elegant and sophisticated way. And it's a very, very loaded statement. And this comprehension, the cognizance of this has actually affected everything that the Indian, our ancestors have dealt with. Just like the reductionistic approach has affected everything that the Westerners have done, this has been the underlying current for the Indian thinking. So now let us look at, I told you all that I'm going to explain how Ayurveda works as a pragmatic medicine. When I say pragmatic medicine, it means how does it work in a clinical setting. So when there is a patient with a problem, how does it diagnose and how does it treat, right? So for that, we need to, Ayurveda needs to classify the human system. That it has a philosophical, touch to it, that cannot play a role when a patient comes with a fever, or when they come with a physical ailment, like, that they have a joint pain, right? So for this, Ayurveda needs to have a classification, and we have seen how modern medicine has classified the human system. It has classified it based on structures. Now, Ayurveda starts with a very broad classification, a gross aspect of the human system and the subtle aspect of the human system. And in the gross aspect, there are 3 other sub-classifications Ayurveda offers. So it has classified the human system based on structures. The Sanskrit term for this is dhatus. So this the dhatu or structure-based classification deals with the physical aspect of the body. There is also a function-based classification. This deals with doshas, that is vata, pitta, and kapha predominantly. And this deals with the physiological and psychological aspect of the body. And of course, when you say physical is implied in it. And there is also a system-wise classification defined by Srotas. And this deals with physical, physiological, and psychological aspect of the human system. And then there is a subtle aspect, and this aspect is, this aspect is dealt with by the levels of awareness. And this deals with the psychological and subtle realms of awareness or existence in the human system. Now, I am going to touch upon, give you all, help you all get a peek into this functional aspect, because as I said, this runs as an undercurrent to the entire handling of health and disease in Ayurveda. So when you say functions, there are, many parameters which contributes to a function. Structures, biochemistry, range of activities from electrical, magnetic, mental, emotional to even spiritual activities. All these put together contribute to a function. So if there is a viewpoint based on function, it is going to include all these parameters, right? And it will be very, very different to a structural viewpoint which modern medicine has adopted. It is interesting to see that structure and biochemistry, both of which play a very, very important role in the understanding of the human system, understanding and handling of the human system by modern medicine, it is inbuilt into functions. So as I said, to understand, to be able to handle a complex system, we need to have some kind of classification. The way modern medicine has classified is using structures, and they use those structural components to handle the system. And Ayurveda, because of its very different viewpoint, it has identified functions to be the major way to understand the system. And they have identified three major functions: movement, metabolism, and growth. And in the context of Ayurveda, these are defined by Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. For convenience, I will refer to these as V, P, and K. Without go into the nitty-gritty details, I would like to tell you all that how Vata deals with all movements in body and mind. Ayurveda never delinks body and mind. Not a second does it leave the two separate. It's always as one cohesive unit. And so all movements from gross to subtle, you see the movement of blood, you see the movement of the heart, and even subtler movement, you see the molecules or ions moving in and out of the cell membrane. Even something subtler, the movement of thought, all movements from gross to subtle comes under Vata, and all metabolic processes comes under Pitta, whether it is digestion and transformation at the physical level or at the psychological or the mental level. Pitta deals with them. It defines and helps Ayurveda understand these specific aspects of the human system. And pH and temperature are two cardinal, very important parameters defined under Pitta. And let me tell you all that although all the information is given, it's given in English. It's all taken from classical Ayurvedic text. Nothing is my own interpretation except for this word, maybe this word pH. Ayurveda doesn't use the word pH. Instead, it uses the word acidity. And so I have taken the logical inference is that it refers to pH. And Kapha deals with physical growth and support, and it's responsible for structural basis and stability and lubrication. Here you see how the development of a fetus, which involves physical growth and support, but it also means that there is movement and transformation, and which is when a fetus grows, right? So all the three, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, the functions associated with all the three play a role in any function. So the entire psychophysiological functions in the human system can be understood in terms of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And these are subdivided into 5 subtypes each. And between these 15 subclassifications, all the psychophysiological functions in the system can be understood. There are no psychophysiological functions which comes outside the purview of this. This covers comprehensively everything associated with the human system. And a very notable feature here is absence of hierarchy. So here we see that there is a structural hierarchy. So first is atoms, then you have molecules, then you have organelles, then you have cells. But here in the functional classification adopted by Ayurveda, there is no hierarchy. So it's not that, movement comes first and then the metabolism and transformation and then the growth, physical growth. All these happen at the same time. So whether it is a growth of a fetus or something that happens in the level of cell or at the entire organism level, the Vata, Pitta, and Kapha and the functions associated with them happen side by side. So there is no hierarchy here. So V, P, and K encompass the entire psychophysiological functions, but what has made Ayurveda or what has made VPK a very, very useful tool, or it is actually a theory. It's a theory of BP and K. What has made this theory very useful for Ayurveda is the second point, that VP and K, they are characterized by biophysical, chemical, physiological, and psychological parameters. It's a pity I will not have time to go through these, but this is just to give an idea as to what kind of parameters Ayurveda talks about. So in physical, dryness, fluidity, adhesivity, size, stiffness, viscosity, and so on. And, talks about pH and temperature. And there are psychological parameters which again are, classified in terms of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So this is just an example how these parameters are interconnected with each other. So how a change in dryness can cause change in many other parameters. So actually, Ayurveda looks at the entire human system as a network of different properties, a network of psychological properties, a network of biophysical properties. And this picture here shows how Vata, Pitta and Kapha and the sub-classifications are network connected with each other, and how this networking is used by Ayurvedic Vaidyas till date to handle health and disease. Now, this picture is taken from Systems Biology book. This shows the network of genes. So now modern medicine also talks about systems thinking, systems approach, systems biology is that which talks about how genes are connected with each other. So there is this discipline of genomes and proteomes and metabolomes. And Ayurveda, the only difference between this network and this network is what the nodes and the associations denote. Here the nodes can denote either a protein or a small metabolite or a gene. Here it denotes system properties, biophysical properties, and here the associations are between these structural entities, here the association are between these functional properties. So when this network is in balance, it denotes health, and when this is born out of balance, it denotes disease. So disease in Ayurveda is actually a system perturbance. The Ayurvedic doctor actually tries to get this system back to balance. So how is this theory translated, the theory of Vata, Pitta, Kapha, how is it translated into practice, clinical practice? In a very, very ingenious way or indigenous way, since the human system is understood in terms of BPK, BPK has been made as a common platform for all factors which play a role in health and disease, whether it is medicinal plant or it is edible plants or, which are part of our diet, or animals which are part of our diet and it's used for medicines, environment, clinical symptoms, lifestyle activities, all these are classified in terms of BPK. So BPK has becomes the common language for all factors which not only play a role in health and disease, these are also factors which can be manipulated to handle health and disease. I will just give a very small example about the clinical symptoms, just to give you all how clinical symptoms have been classified into Vata, Pitta, Kapha. So if the pain is a shifting pain, it's a very typical feature in chikungunya, it is Vata. If there is association of burning sensation, it is a Pitta kind of fever. And if the pain is dull and heavy, it is Kapha related. Another example, if it's a fluctuating fever like malaria, the temperature fluctuates through the day, it is Vata associated. If the patient complains of a burning sensation in the eyes and the bitter taste in the mouth, it's Pitta related. And if the patient has a heavy cough and cold and a low grade fever, it is Kapha related. So there are no clinical symptoms which comes outside the purview of these. It could be autoimmune disease, it could be coronavirus caused disease, it could be chikungunya, it could be dengue, it could be swine flu, it could be rheumatoid arthritis, it could be anything. The symptoms have to come under within these classifications. So this is how this theory of Vata, Pitta, Kapha is used for diagnosis, because the question is always posed as to how Ayurvedic Vaidyas can claim to be able to treat diseases which were not known during the time of Charaka and Sushruta, or diseases which were not even known, a few decades ago. So the answer is that they have a theory, and using this theory, they can diagnose the disease. So for example, if a patient goes to an Ayurvedic doctor, let's say the allopathic doctor, they look at the symptoms and treat the symptoms. The same patient goes to an Ayurvedic doctor, they look at the symptoms, and from the symptoms, you see that the big difference is that symptoms are directly connected to the root cause of the problem. The root cause of the problem, according to Ayurveda, is an imbalance in Vata, Pitta and Kapha. So here the symptoms tells which have gone out of balance. And they can go, the Ayurvedic doctors can go even beyond this and identify the diet and lifestyle activities which have actually caused this imbalance. So which is why Ayurvedic doctors, they address the root cause of the problem, and the treatment is very, very effective if the diagnosis is done very well, correctly. So VPK provides a theoretical framework for all the psychosomatic life processes, and the treatment is very different to modern medicine. It's a very comprehensive management where there are physical interventions in terms of panchakarmas, procedures and medicines and diet interventions, and non-pharmacological interventions like lifestyle changes and yoga and meditation. So this picture brings out the very big difference between Ayurveda and modern medicine. So from this viewpoint, observation point, the landscape is captured in its entirety. So you can see that the entire forest from here. You cannot see the nitty-gritty details of a tree here, but you capture the entire picture. This is a microscopic structure of one of the leaf in one of the tree here. From this viewpoint, you see more details. You see the details in all its glory, but you lose the entire picture. From here, you get the entire picture, but you lose the details. So different heights gives you different views, and this leads to different understanding, this leads to different terminologies, and this leads to different way of handling the same system. And so there are many other concepts in Ayurveda which are all now talked about in the contemporary science as well. Personalized treatment and health, preventive medicine, promotive health, systems approach, circadian rhythm and health. You may know that 2017 Nobel Prize for Medicine went for 3 American scientists who talked about circadian rhythm and its relationship to health. Ayurveda has talked about it 5,000 years. I am not one of those who says that, we knew everything, right? But I mean, if we knew, we have to have that open-mindedness and objectivity to accept that, yes, we knew. There were many things that modern science knows now and which we did not know, right? So that also we should have that objectivity to say that, that we do not know this. So we neither need to be left where we dump everything, nor we need to be right where we are emotionally attached to our knowledge system and we say that we knew everything. We have to learn to be objective and open-minded, and this has been taught to us by Atreya and our Indian knowledge system, how to be objective. So Ayurveda talks about mind and health, precision nutrition, therapeutic nutrition, sustainable medicine. Sustainable medicine is a very, very recent topic. Ayurveda talks about sustainable medicine. It talks about ecological health. It talks about environmental health. So, Ayurveda it's a very, very comprehensive system. I'm coming to a few more slides and I'm ending. I realize that I'm overshooting the time, but I am very, very keen that I convey whatever, the maximum possible I can convey in this time. Although I have already overshot the time, I apologize for this. I want to say a few words about systems biology, which is coming up in a very, very big way in modern biology, and it's going to impact modern medicine in a very, very, in a tremendous way. It's going to be a paradigm shift for modern medicine, as people say, as the systems biologists say. So something that the systems biology talks about is emerging properties at each level. So you see that at the level of atom, there are no chemical bonds. Chemical bond is a property that you see at this level. And as you keep moving up the structural hierarchy, there are new properties which emerges at that level. Let me give a very simple example. Let us take a small step from atom to molecule. Let's take the example of water molecule. We know that property of water is not equivalent to property of hydrogen plus property of oxygen. Oxygen and hydrogen, they are components which make water. But hydrogen is a very highly inflammable gas and water is used to put down fire. So property of water is not equal to property of hydrogen plus property of oxygen. A very simple example and a very striking example as well. The boiling point of water is 100 degrees centigrade, but look at the boiling point of hydrogen and oxygen. Boiling point of hydrogen is minus 252.8 degrees centigrade, and that of oxygen is minus 183 degrees centigrade. They simply do not add up to even zero, or even, minus 1, minus 2, minus 3, minus 10, no, right? So what this means is that when you keep moving up the structural complexity, there are new properties which emerges, which cannot be understood by understanding the individual properties of the components which make it up. So even this is such a small step from atom to molecule, and water is such a simple molecule. Even this, the property of its boiling point cannot be understood by understanding the property of hydrogen and oxygen. Now, if we are going to run into this problem from atom to molecule, imagine, the complexity that would arise, when we go past all these and reach the human system. So this is something that the systems biology is talking about, but they are still talking about in terms of the cellular components. The systems biology is that of, how the genes are networked, how they interact with each other to define emergent function, or, how metabolites interact or proteins interact. But the systems biology that Ayurveda talks about is at the level of the entire organism, where they include physical, physiological, psychological, and even the very, very subtle non-physical aspect of the human system. So what can Ayurveda offer? Is it something that we take pride and as an intellectual exercise, or does it have anything to offer in the contemporary healthcare, where almost you can hardly find anybody who is healthy? This is true of not only India, but the world as well. Every disease is big epidemic. Every disease is, it's the most important, kind of disease, and loads of money are pumped into to find out cures for these diseases, whether it is diabetes or cancer or osteoarthritis. Everything is a huge problem. In such a situation, can Ayurveda, with its very different viewpoint, does it offer anything? And more importantly, what can Ayurveda offer to an engineering and a technology student? After all, the game of this webinar is to connect a student to these Indian systems of knowledge through the teachers, right? So what can Ayurveda offer to technologists and engineers? Well, at a very, very practical level, it offers huge amount of research material. It has huge scope. I have just listed some of them. It offers scope for technological development, data analytics, ecological health, environmental health, water management, and eco health, and eco medicine, and sustainable medicine, and whatnot. But I think the most important giveaway that Ayurveda has for everybody, whether the person is educated or not, whether the student is a student of engineering or technology or medicine or physics or economics or sociology or anthropology, what Ayurveda can offer is physical, physiological, and psychological health. So let me, this is my last slide. So the take-home messages are that Ayurveda's perspective on health and disease is holistic, very different and from that of modern medicine. Difference doesn't mean that something is unscientific. So we all should train ourselves to think in a more scientific manner. On one hand, there is, the scientists are making a lot of very good efforts in the society to bring in a scientific temperament and for people. But at the same time, if we remain, if we have a closed mind to certain systems of knowledge just because it belongs to our past, then we are all hypocrites. On one side, one hand we are telling we scientific, and on the other hand we ourselves are unscientific because we have closed our mind. We already have an opinion about systems about which we do not know. So Ayurveda is an example of Indian knowledge system having contemporary relevance. It can play a major role in global health scenario. Good health is good life. At the end of the day, we all want to have a happy life, right? And happy life is from good health. I mean, for some people, happy life could be earning money, but to earn money, you need to have health. Without health, you can't do a business. For some people, it could be, doing research, but doing research also you need good health. If I have a back pain, constant low back pain, I cannot do my lab work, right? So whether it is the artha, whether you want to, because the purusharthas are artha, kama, moksha, right? And dharma, artha, kama, moksha, whether you want to lead a dharmic life, whether you want to be a philanthropist, do good to the society, you need help. If I'm having a constant headache or a constant stomach ache, I'm not in a position to think good for others. Whether I want to do dharma or I want to karma. Karma is enjoying life. If I want to enjoy life, I'm earning so much, and if I want to enjoy the fruits of my earning, right, then I need to have health. What is the point of earning so much money? And I have diabetes, I can't take a gulab jamun, I can't take this. It doesn't mean anything. Or whether I want to earn artha, right? Then I need good health. Or I want to attain moksha, right? Then I need, because if I want to attain moksha, then there is a methodology for that, which is given by yoga. So if I have to sit in a yogasana, if I have a back pain or a cervical spondylosis, I cannot sit in a posture. So whatever you want to do, whether it is dharma, artha, kama, moksha, good health is required, and that's what Ayurveda offers. And I end here. I thank you all for sitting through my lecture so patiently. I presume you're all still there. And so I end with this beautiful dictum of our ancestors, that this is the translation of Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha, Sarve Santu Niramayaha. May all be healthy, may all be happy, may all be healthy, may all enjoy prosperity, and may none suffer. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, madam, for such a nice and with coverage lecture. Now there are few questions, so I'll request Professor Suneja to ask his question. Professor Suneja, please ask your question. Unmute your mic and ask your question.
Yeah. Good afternoon to all. Ma'am, what I could have heard, basically, you told that the naturopathy is not the part of our ancient practices with regard to health. Is it?
Yeah. Yes, of course, yes.
So that is the newly developed some practices?
Yeah, it's a very, very recently developed.
Okay. And then my second question, ma'am, we have heard that the Ayurveda medicine, which contains the metallic part like Swarna Bhasma or like that, they are very harmful or leading to cancer. Is it true?
Do you think? I mean, we are.
I don't know. We have heard that.
No, yeah, I know. This is a question in that would be in many people's minds. Now, let us apply logic to this, right? So we are talking about a system which says, may everybody be happy, may everybody be healthy, may all enjoy prosperity, may none suffer. Will it give medicines which are harmful? Obviously not. You have to take a logical inference. That is one answer. But let me tell you that, yes, Ayurveda has a branch which is called Rasa Shastra, where it uses metals, minerals, and toxic materials for preparing medicines. And so the reason is that the poisons, the toxic materials, are very, very quick acting, right? And so what this discipline says is that the poisons have two important properties. One is the toxicity, the other is the quick action. We are removing the toxicity, converting these toxic materials into a therapeutically useful form, right? And by doing this, we are retaining its quick action, right? So they come up with medicines which are devoid of its toxicity, and then it retains its quick action. And these are all very, very fast acting medicine, just like allopathic medicines, right?
Okay.
And
Thanks.
to remove the toxicity, there are elaborate procedures
Mhm.
to remove the toxicity. So if one one reads these textbooks, the first thing that they say is that what are the toxic side effects of these medicines. For example, if they talk about mercury, right? So they say that these are all the toxic side effects of mercury, and how to remove these, and how important it is to follow these procedures and remove the toxicity. So they knew what they were doing. So till date, these preparations are used. These are called rasa preparations, and these are used till date by Ayurvedic doctors. And I have not heard if the medicines are prepared well, and and I have not come across any patient dying because of taking these medicines. But of course, the processing has to be followed to the core, right? But
Thank you, ma'am.
it is not true that all Ayurvedic. So there are plant-based medicines which do not have any metals in it, metals or minerals.
Okay. Thank
So
you,
it's
ma'am.
not
Thank you
that
so much.
all Ayurvedic medicines have this.
Thank you, ma'am.
In fact, there are also very interesting studies on these bhasmas. These are called bhasmas, the rasa preparations. Very interesting studies done by quite a few IITs, where they have shown that these bhasmas are nanoparticles actually. So when you say, something is at a nano level, you all know that the physical and the chemical properties changes. So for example, if you take gold at a macroscopic level is a metal, right? It is in a solid form. But gold as a nanoparticle is in a colloidal form. The physical property changes. Gold as a metal at the macroscopic level is a noble metal, so which doesn't react with anything. But a nano gold is highly reactive, right? So the physical and the chemical properties change, when something comes down to a nano level. So it's probably that, all these toxic materials that Ayurveda uses for for medicines, when it's brought down, made into a nano form, it loses that toxicity. There are very interesting scientific studies now which have proven this.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for clearing my myths, which was in my back of the mind. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for asking this question, because this is a question that is there in almost everybody's mind, because this is the kind of negative projection that Ayurveda has been given. This is done by people who do not know what exactly the system is about.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Another question is from Dr. Manisha Shukla. Dr. Manisha Shukla, please ask.
Good afternoon, ma'am. It was a very wonderful session. What I would really be interested in knowing, the NMR and the MRI concepts, they are more based on nuclear magnetic resonance phenomena. So when when the electromagnetic radiations do enter into a system or a human system, so it has its own pros and cons. So right, like when we talk of the X-rays and we talk of the other studies, definitely it does have its own, disadvantage too. So in that case, like how valid is it to subject, even at infant level, at times, I'm sure you have to do MRIs and all those things. So, since Ayurveda has its own theoretical way of treatment, whereas the allopathy has more of a science-based dealing. So, like if I come to a critical thinking, in that case, won't Ayurveda be developed to have an edge over the allopathic system of medicine?
I think Ayurveda already has an edge over allopathic system of medicine. It's just that we are not aware of it, or we do not want to believe it. So, but now let me go to the first part of your question. How safe? Because NMR and MRI, it uses electromagnetic radiation. How safe it is? So actually MRI, it uses I mean, you know that, you know, the electromagnetic spectrum is a huge one, you know, starting from the non-ionizing radiation, which is the radio frequency, and at one end of the spectrum, and at the other end of the spectrum, you have the ionizing radiation, which is the X-ray, right? Now, MRI uses the radio frequency part of the electromagnetic spectrum, which is non-ionizing. So it is that part of the electromagnetic spectrum which is used in radios. So these non-ionizing radiations are not known to have any detrimental effect on a biological system, and there are many studies to show that. So in that context, you know, MRI is one of the most safe techniques to be used on patients. And in fact, it is safe to use MRI even on pregnant women to study fetus. I mean, if there is a necessity. So that is not, so that answers that part of this answers that part of your question about the safety of MR and the electromagnetic radiations that are used in it. The other part is that, if I have understood you right, you are asking that, so it's a statement that that modern medicine is technology dependent, and you feel that the edge allopathy has over Ayurveda is because of the technology. Is that right? Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Basically, ma'am, you know, what I really want to put forward is that since Ayurveda has its own natural way of through the natural constituents, the treatment method,
Yeah.
but you know, all the more allopathy has become more prominent and more customer friendly, if I may say, more present generation friendly. So,
Yeah.
you know, since the Ayurveda,
very, very cost friendly, you know?
exactly, cost friendly as well. But then Ayurveda is not so popular amongst the common man. Like I fail to understand the reason why, because
There are many reasons for it. Actually, Ayurveda is not popular among the educated people because of there are many historical reasons. We still have a very, very heavy colonial hangover, and but to a common man, Ayurveda is very popular. You will have to see, you know, the crowd in an Ayurvedic hospital. I mean, in a good Ayurvedic hospital or a Vaidya, the common man does not have that much of a problem as educated section of the society has. So the reason why Ayurveda is not popular, I mean, it's very difficult to pinpoint one reason. So it's number of reasons, and one reason I can go through a couple of these reasons. See, we should understand that till the British introduced allopathic system, it was Ayurveda which was taking care of the health of the people, of Indians. And Indians have survived through thick and thin and through disasters and whatnot for all these years. I mean, Indian civilization is one civilization which has not had a break at all. You look at the Greek civilization, you look at the Egyptian civilization, you look at any other civilization, there has been a break. Indian civilization is the only civilization where there is a complete continuity. I mean, Charaka Samhita written 5,000 years ago, we still are using. The names mentioned 5,000 years ago, we still are using those names, right? The practices 5,000 years ago, we still are. You and me as the educated section may not be using, but you will see it being used in a village. So, you know, so Ayurveda has, and if you look at the contributions of the country, now India, even now, it is known for the contributions of yesteryears, not for what we are doing now. The contributions of Indian engineers or scientists of now, it's not being taken cognizance of. It's not making a big impact. Now, what the West is still talking about, would like to know is, you know, our architecture, you know, I mean, now, you know, we build a house and within 3 months, you see the crack. Now, you know, I'm speaking in my house and I see, look at the wall in front of me, there is a crack running from top, from ceiling to floor. But we are looking, we have architectural wonders, you know, beauties absolutely. which have survived 1,000, 2,000 years ago. Of 1,000, 2,000 years of they are all standing in the open, right? Floods and cyclones and tsunamis and environmental pollution. So these structures have withstood, and we still all our literature, all these are still big wonder, maybe not to Indians, because we have got into this habit of being too critical of ourselves and shooting ourselves in our foot, but it is always a big wonder and fascination for the Westerners, right? Now you should understand that any society will be able to come forth with such productions only if there is health, if the society is healthy physically, physiologically and psychologically. So, and this health of the society was taken care of by Ayurveda. It is only when the Britishers came, they introduced Ayurveda, was sidelined. There were a lot of nasty things which were done to Ayurveda, which I don't want to go into the details of it. You can find in the net, lot of information is there. But Ayurveda was systematically sidelined, and allopathy was given the prominence, and which is natural. These people had colonized us, and obviously they would like to, they have a very different viewpoint, right? And they are here, they colonized us, and they were looking down on us, and they are not going to let Ayurveda take care of the health of the people. So they introduced and they did everything to make allopathic system mainstream and this into a side thing. And what has happened is, after independence also, we have continued. The education system which was set up by the British is what we still go through, right? So this is one major reason as to why Ayurveda is where it is now. And of course, we have not understood what science is. We think that just because a lot of technology is used, something becomes scientific. And just because technology was not used in Ayurveda, that it is somehow less scientific or not scientific at all. It is not true. Science is not about use of technology. Technology is that to facilitate something, right? Now we have mathematics, we have theoretical chemistry, theoretical physics. Not a single instrument. Maybe now people are using computers, but there were theoretical physicists like Einstein and all who did not use a computer, right? So they did not use any technology. So that these disciplines do not become any less scientific. We know how hardcore science, what hardcore science it is. So for us to think, for educated section of the Indian population to think that Ayurveda is not scientific because it did not use the MRI or CT, I think it is, it only reflects on how little we have understood what science is. Science is not technology. Technology is just a tool. Science, whether a system is scientific or not, will be reflected in the logic that is inbuilt into the science. Is the discipline, has a rational way of putting things? Can we make it understandable in a scientific way to the other person? Or the results which are a result of applying this science, is it reproducible, right? So if a patient with rheumatoid arthritis comes to an Ayurvedic doctor, right, and they treat, and the patient gets cured, is this reproducible? Is this treatment working on 1,000 patients or 2,000 patients? If yes, it is scientific, it's reproducible. So, our own, there is a historical reason, and our own, mental hang-ups we have, the mental cobwebs we have, the lack of self-respect we have, the lack of, I do not know what else, and you all can fill in, the loads of lack of this, lack of that, all these have contributed to how we are viewing Ayurveda.
Hello, ma'am. I just wanted to congratulate you on a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
I really appreciate. This is Sharmila Asthana. I'm a pediatrician, and I'm actually now working on holistic health. And I think that the way you put forward the concepts and the fundamentals, it was really wonderful to listen to. And I just want to congratulate the whole team, Ruchirji and everybody who gave us the opportunity to listen to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And, I'm so pleased that allopathic doctor has listened to it, because you see, the common point, the common, a subject of interest for any clinician, whether Ayurveda or allopathy, is the patient. Ultimately,
True.
Any true doctor, good doctor, would want, the cure, would not
Yes,
want the
absolutely.
patient to suffer, right?
Yes.
And so it is very important that in our country, especially that the allopathic stream fraternity should work with the Ayurvedic fraternity.
Absolutely.
But before that, it is very important for the allopathic fraternity to know why you are all looking at the human system the way you are looking at. And it is
True.
important for you all to understand that this is not the only way. This is
Yes,
one of the way,
absolutely.
but not the only way. And it is very important for you all to know how Ayurveda looks at it. Without that clarity, that handshake will never be on equal platform, right?
Absolutely,
It will
absolutely.
always be like, no, we are superior, and we will take from you all whatever is going to be of use to us. That should not be. Let us not forget that ultimately, as doctors, we all want the welfare of the people.
Yeah, actually, I have left practice and we are working with some Ayurvedic doctors, and we are working on holistic health for this student induction program itself.
Right.
So I think, I really like to get in touch with you also to learn some more things from you,
Sure.
maybe at another time. But it was really a wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we can take one more question probably. Rajatji, kindly ask your question and then we'll close the session.
Namaste, thanks for the wonderful lecture. The doubt which I'm having is, for example, I've heard this quotation saying Ayurvai Kritam. So I was just wondering, over time, there would be changes in the way we are growing our cows, and especially these days, Jersey cows and hybrid cows, and they're coming. So I'm just wondering, the milk and the ghee of those cows, and especially some of the milk federations, they end up mixing the milk of cows and buffaloes and so on. So how would if it is used as a medicine, how would it interact with the human body? And also in the agriculture, today we are mainly shifted to chemical agriculture with the use of a lot of pesticides, fertilizers and so on. So I was just wondering about the efficacy. Would it be the same which has been told by Charaka, Vagbhata, etc.? Has any work gone on in this direction?
Yeah. So Charaka has very clearly said that that things would change over time, right? So it has been very, our ancestors were much cleverer than us. There's no doubt about it. I think we are all unworthy successors of very worthy ancestors. So they were not dogmatic about what they said. They said that that's why they have come up with the theory, a general theory, which is applicable at all times. Whether it was 5,000 years ago, or 5,000 years later, the theories are usable because they are based on natural laws which do not change. So if you have a theory based on molecules or proteins or genes, right, these are things which changes. So you may have a gene which doesn't express today. Tomorrow, the same gene may be expressing, right? So, but here Ayurveda uses properties which doesn't change over time. The physiology has not changed over time. The heart has been beating the same way 5,000 years ago and now as well. The sun 5,000 years ago gave the heat, even now it's giving the heat. And what does the heat do? It dries up things, right? And what does the moon do? And what does the river do? What does the water do? So, the ancestors had looked at the nature, and they had this concept that the connect between the microcosm and the macrocosm. They felt that what is seen in the human being is a reflection of what they see outside. So the laws, the theories and concepts they drew for the human system has been from the nature, which is why the theory of Ayurveda works till date. So, you know, the theories are applicable. That is the beauty of Ayurveda. Movement was there even in those days. In those days also, you know, the dryness was there in a system, or the viscosity was there. All these are properties which doesn't change. What contributes to the property may have changed. For example, if you take dryness, you know, there would be a molecule or a protein or a gene which is responsible for dryness. That might have changed over time, but the dryness per se has not changed. So if we have a dry skin, it was the same way, you know, whether it was 5000 in the time of Charaka or now. So that is how, you know, they have given these theories. And, you know, Charaka Samhita very clearly says that we have given the theory, and this has to be applied according to the time period. So they already were foreseeing things. They said environment would change, and, you know, the ecosystem would change. There would be degradation of health. There would, so when they say there would be a degradation of health, so Charaka Samhita says that there would be a degradation of health of the human beings, right? So when they say health, they are also talking about a health of the plants, health of animals, health of the ecosystem. They foresaw those, and they say that apply these theories accordingly. So Ayurveda is very relevant. The Ayurvedic theories are very relevant because they do not focus on a molecule or a protein, right? And it's relevant 5000 years after Charaka Samhita. It will be relevant 5000 years from now also. And what they have also given is, so whether it is the human system or the factors which contribute to our health and disease. For example, let's take the example of milk, right? Definitely the milk that was used, consumed even, you know, 50 years ago, even milk that I consumed, you know, when I was a child is not what we are consuming now. But then this is where research is required, right? And now we are also lucky that we have such sophisticated technologies which can look at any aspect of whatever we are studying. So Ayurveda, just like, you know, it looks at the human system in terms of properties, it looks at all the food items and plants and everything in the same way. So there are properties associated with milk, for example, or even with water. So these properties are not the kind of properties that we as scientists have been exposed to. So when you say milk, you know, the kind of things that a scientist would look at is how much carbohydrate it has, how much vitamins and minerals it has, or how much fat it has. And now, you know, I mean, whatever, you know, whatever other proteins it has, right? These, let us remember that these are all structural entities, right? In tune with the Western philosophy. And so we are all tuned to that. But, you know, there are, Ayurveda looks at functional properties. And these properties can be studied. In fact, one of my major research area and interest is to come up with techniques and technologies for studying properties that Ayurveda talks about. Because these are properties which are sanatana, which are eternal, right? And which can be studied. And if we study the milk, different kinds of milk that we have now, we can see which of them matches the properties mentioned in Charaka. Which are the properties that a milk, as a supplier of nutrition to people, what are all the properties that are still retained? And then, you know, we have enough knowledge now to see how we can enhance the property, right? Now, actually, instead of enhancing the property, we are removing things from milk. So one is that, you know, milk would have undergone some changes, and then, you know, it is not the same milk that we had, you know, even a few decades ago, but we are also introducing changes in the milk. So we are pasteurizing the milk. When you pasteurize, you are removing the fat in it. It is very naive to see, these are all a reflection of the reductionistic approach. So we feel that milk is nothing plus carbohydrate plus vitamins plus proteins plus whatnot. And we feel that if we remove fat, nothing is going to change alter in the milk. It is very naive. These are not molecules which are sitting in compartments in isolation. Milk is a milk because of the way these various structural entities interact. Now, when there are, let's say, 6 molecules interacting, and then you're removing one molecule, the interaction between these 5 molecules is not going to be the same. So we are doing the damage, and we are asking questions like, whether, what is mentioned in Ayurveda is going to be relevant now. The basic properties are relevant. We have to make sure that we are not always, interfering with the nature of things. So if we interfere, then we need to know, instead of looking only at the structural entities, we need to know how the properties of that is changed. So coming to your agriculture, that part of the question, Vriksha Ayurveda is, so Ayurveda has 3 major branches. Mriga Ayurveda, which is veterinary science, Vriksha Ayurveda, which is the Ayurvedic botany, if I may use that, translated that way, and then the Manushya Ayurveda, the Ayurveda dealing with humans. Now, Vriksha Ayurveda is an absolutely wonderful science, and this was Vriksha Ayurveda was what was used in our agriculture. The plants were also understood in terms of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Now we are talking of one, concept which will encompass all the biological systems, right? So we are talking of a unified concept. Now this Vata, Pitta, Kapha is a unifying concept that our ancestors had developed. So whether it is plants or animals or super animals like the humans, the same concepts were used. And Vriksha Ayurveda played a major role in the organic farming that was followed. And it would now, we are creating our own problems, right? And the solution is very much in us. The solution is not in the science. Science is something that, we develop, and it is still in our hands whether we want to use it or not. So it's a self-inflicted pressure for many reasons, which we cannot go into. We have landed ourselves in this soup, right? Now we all realize that it is a big soup that we have landed ourselves in, because it has led to environmental degradation, it has led to ecological degradation, it has impacted on our health. So, it is very much in our hands to stop in our track and take a look back and take a few steps back and take stock of things. And if there is any other way of handling this, any other better way of handling things, I think if we are all intelligent people, we should do it.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for that elaborate answer. Thanks.
Thank you, madam, for such a nice lecture and such good question answering. We'll be looking for your support further as well for induction program and other activities.
Absolutely, I'm there.
Thank you. Thank you very much.